The morning sun beat down on the Marine Corps training facility as Sergeant Jake Morrison wiped the sweat from his brow. Frustration etched across his face. For 3 hours, he and his elite sniper team had been attempting a series of precision shots at 1,200 yards. And for 3 hours, they had failed miserably. The wind was unpredictable. The heat created mirages that distorted their vision. And despite all their training, their advanced equipment, and their determination, not a single bullet had found its mark. The targets remained untouched, mocking them from across the desert range. Now, you might be thinking this is just another training day, right? But what happened next changed everything these Marines thought they knew about being a marksman. Because sometimes the most powerful lessons come from the most unexpected teachers. Colonel Hayes stood behind them, arms crossed, his expression unreadable. He had brought a guest today, someone he said could teach them something valuable. The Marines barely glanced at the old man standing beside the colonel, a weathered figure in his 80s, with silver hair and hands that trembled slightly at his sides. His name was Frank Delacroix, and to the young Marines, looked like someone's grandfather who had wandered on to the wrong military base. They couldn't imagine what this frail old man could possibly teach them. About precision shooting. Morrison was the first to speak, his voice tinged with barely concealed irritation. He told the colonel that they had tried everything, adjusted for wind, compensated for temperature, calculated every variable their training had taught them. The old man remained silent, his pale blue eyes studying the distant targets with an intensity that seemed out of place in his aged frame. Colonel Hayes simply nodded toward Frank and told the Marines to watch carefully. What happened next would become a story repeated in every Marine Corps sniper school for years to come. Frank approached the rifle with slow, deliberate steps. His hands still shook as he lowered himself to the ground, his knees cracking audibly. The Marines exchanged skeptical glances. Some even smirked. How could someone who could barely hold a rifle steady possibly succeed where they had failed? But then Frank touched the weapon and something changed. His trembling hands became steady. His breathing slowed to an almost imperceptible rhythm. He didn't rush to look through the scope. Instead, he closed his eyes and tilted his head slightly, as if listening to something only he could hear. The desert wind whispered across the range, and Frank seemed to become part of it, his body relaxing into the earth beneath him. When he finally opened his eyes and pressed his cheek against the stock, there was no hesitation, no adjustment, no calculation. He simply exhaled slowly and squeezed the trigger. The crack of the rifle echoed across the range. 1,200 yards away, the first target shattered. Before anyone could react, Frank chambered another round. Again, that same stillness, that same impossible calm. Another shot. Another target destroyed? 5 times he fired, and 5 times the targets fell, each shot separated by no more than 10 seconds. When he finished, Frank slowly pushed himself up from the ground, his hands trembling once more, and handed the rifle back to Morrison without a word. The silence that followed was deafening. These were some of the best-trained snipers in the world, and they had just been humbled by a man who looked like he should be sitting on a porch somewhere telling stories to his grandchildren. Morrison found his voice first, asking Frank how he had done it. What did he see that they had missed? What calculations had he made? Frank smiled then, a sad, knowing smile that carried decades of memory. He told them he hadn't calculated anything at all. During the Vietnam War, when he was their age, he had been the best sniper in his platoon, maybe in the whole Marine Corps. He had relied on his equipment, his training, his perfect eyesight, and his steady hands. He had thought those things made him a great shooter. But then came the day his spotter was killed beside him, and Frank had to complete a mission alone. Taking an impossible shot through triple canopy jungle with faulty equipment and a wounded shoulder. That day, he learned that all the technology and training in the world meant nothing if you couldn't feel the shot. Before you took it, he explained that they were trying too hard, thinking too much, fighting against conditions instead of becoming part of them. The wind wasn't their enemy. It was their partner. The heat shimmer wasn't a problem. It was information. Frank told them that a rifle was just metal and wood, but a shooter was flesh and blood and instinct. He said you had to stop trying to conquer the distance and instead respect it, understand it, become one with it. His hands shook now because his body was old, but his spirit, his connection to the moment, that was stronger than it had ever been. Morrison felt something shift inside him as he listened. All his training had taught him to control every variable, but Frank was teaching him to surrender to them, to trust something deeper than knowledge. That afternoon, Morrison tried again. This time, he didn't calculate. He breathed. He felt. He let the wind tell him its secrets, and when he fired, the target fell. One by one. Every Marine on that range found their mark, not because an old man had given them a technique, but because he had given them wisdom. Frank Delacroix left the base that evening, having spoken fewer than 200 words, but having changed the lives of every person present. Sometimes the greatest strength isn't found in youth or technology or even training. Sometimes it's found in the quiet wisdom of someone who has learned that true mastery comes not from controlling the world around you, but from understanding your place within it. If this story touched your heart, share it with someone who needs to remember that age is just a number and wisdom is timeless. Because somewhere today, someone needs to hear that their experience, their years, their hard-earned lessons still matter in this fast-paced world. Pass it forward.